This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
That's been sitting in the refrigerator for the.
Thank you.
Well, here's the thing: the FBI's been cleaning out the refrigerator.
Keep for 100 years.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So talking about other crimes, we wanted to kind of pick up where we left off on some things, give you any information that you might be thinking about over the last few weeks.
Right.
You said you don't want to give up all your cards. We understand that. We'd love it if you just said, yeah, I'm just going to tell you everything. Then frankly, I would say things would move much more quickly.
Oh, believe me, I'm very well aware of passage of time. In order for things to progress, I have to take a guess as to what's going to happen next, I guess you could say.
It's your schedule. So we can sit here and guess and wonder what's going to happen in the future, and none of us are going to predict, right? We've got all these other crimes to talk about. Everything else is just speculation, so we can wait and see, but time's going to move by.
I know I don't have any rights in this situation. All I have is information. So now you're upset with me that I want to control the information.
No, I'm not upset. It's more depressing, and yeah, there's frustration.
There's going to be a lot of frustration before this is all over, but I mean, it's already been years of frustration for a lot of people, so they're going to have to learn to live with it.
On the one hand, it's really hard to imagine how you would deal with a situation of suddenly finding yourself in the room with a serial killer. So there's that to think about. Then you've got, Anchorage Police Department, the U.S. Attorney General's office, and the FBI that are in the room. So you think, would you have done anything differently? We come up with pretty standard answers to that all the time. They weren't following their own playbook. They weren't following their own protocols. I have the benefit of the passage of time, and I'm able to look at what they did. There's questions that we've had, like Meg brings them up all the time. There are questions in the normal playbook where you're looking at it and you go, why didn't they ask him about a fire there? Why didn't they ask him about a robbery there? I think it would have been overwhelming to some degree. But there's evidence they tried to play mind games with him. And I think looking at it and trying to play mind games backfired. And it's not that I think what was going on with Keyes is like everything out of his mouth is BS, but I do think some of the interpretations of what he was saying are BS. So one, he was answering the heat of the moment. Two, he was simply trying to get to some kind of end resolution for himself that he was comfortable with. And I think that he was saying things that weren't necessarily lies, but that they were tailored for that. And his idea, as of November 29th, was that people were just going to have to live with not knowing. And I think that's what draws me to it. I want to put answers on that. I want to put answers on the not knowing part, in spite of the misinformation.
I get into these situations, I find a name, I run it down, and then I sort of go, like, how do I find out more about this person? Now, I went to do an open records request on this case that we're talking about, and there's just nothing there past 2004. And what I think happened, here's what I think happened. I think she lived in Detroit, and I think there's these series of incidents where she's witnessed a couple of things in 2003, and she moves out of Detroit to Warren, which is only, that's like a suburb, basically. You're not really moving very far. So then it becomes, do I put her on the list? Is she not on the list? The reason that she is interesting to me is, one, her disappearance occurs sometime between March of 2009 and late June, early July 2009. Her daughter finally reports her missing in July of 2009. She's got the same last name as someone on, and the same time frame, if that makes sense. So Lindsey Baum goes missing in June of 2009. So if you're looking for missing Baum, B-A-U-M, 2009, you could come up with her name, but there's no pictures of her or anything. It's literally just like everything I've found about her is like a one-line thing. Even if you go look at a Charlie Project and her NamUs, it essentially is a one-line thing, which is, you see those occasionally, but it's pretty rare. I remembered, you said you remembered her mugshot. That's what I remembered too.
I remember seeing that. She's, I don't know what it is. She's looking away or something. She looked like she got the crap beat out of her.
Yeah, it did not look like a happy situation that had landed to her with that mugshot. But this is Carrie Lee Baum, and she's missing. Essentially, she's missing out of Warren, Michigan. That's where the report is filed. She was 5 feet tall.
She wasn't entered into NamUs until July 16th, 2012.
Right, which brings me to another thing. When they put out these all calls to the field offices for the FBI, I think people were entering into NamUs like a pretty long list of could this be Keys that year, because that gives them enough time to have him in custody. And enough time, so they get him in custody in March. He confesses to Samantha Koenig. And then over the course of the next month and change, he confesses to the couriers, and they're starting to get a better idea of who he is. They were beginning to reach out and find more information, or try to find more information about missing persons. You know, we run into this problem of we can only work with who's reported.
Right. And so recently you've started analyzing sort of like when cases were put in.
Right. I've been looking at, so two types of cases really interest me right now. And that is, I picked the dates of when Israel Keys was in custody. And basically anything that was more than a year old that was put in after those initial conversations up through the Mopin incident. So that recording in July of 2012, anything that was put in after that was like an older case, that interests me. But what's even more interesting is after the Dateline last year, which is like, early summer last year, there's a spate of cases. And the way that you have to search for them in NamUs is their date of last contact needs to be roughly 1997 to 2012. You can use January of 97 through March of 2012 if you want. But what you're looking for is a NamUs case that was created either when Israel Keys was in custody, right after his suicide, right after the first big batch of tips came in, or after they do like these Dateline episodes, which are sort of their all call. It's their way of gathering new rounds of tips on the Israel Keys case.
Right.
Well, there are certain cases, like when I go through there, that catch my eye. Carrie Baum out of Michigan caught my eye because he had looked for cases in Michigan. And there were several of them on his computer, so to speak. The problem with her case is one of these dates on the comparison searches may line up with the date of her disappearance, because we don't know when she disappeared. But she was interesting to me because of the 2009 comparison search matches. We had Lindsey Baum and Kayla Berg, both B last names, and both summer 2009. And we had even mentioned this in some of the other stuff we've been covering. Rose Bly falls in that. She's another B last name. She's in Wisconsin. But every time we start talking about her, we get off on this like crazy track. Probably one of the more interesting cases that I came across in terms of people going missing. If we start to try and apply Israel Keys' own profiling that he did on himself for the FBI. There is an interesting case out of New Mexico. It's actually the previous year. It caught my eye because it's just one of those like straight up vanishing. And you can find this online. It's carried in multiple papers. The Albuquerque Journal, other New Mexico papers carried this. Police seeking a missing man. This is about an abandoned truck found on the highway. The New Mexico State Police are asking for the public's help unraveling a mysterious missing persons case. Stephen Romero was 61. He left his home in Magdalene on April the 14th to go to Albuquerque. He told his sister, who lives in Albuquerque, that he had a doctor's appointment, but he would be spending the night with her after. He asked a neighbor to feed his dog, and he said he'd be back the next day. Now, no one in his family knows which doctor he was supposed to see or whether he made the appointment, but he never showed up at his sister's house, and he's never contacted any other friends or relatives in Albuquerque again. His truck was found Friday on the shoulder of New Mexico 117. And just for orienting this in time, this article is from April the 22nd, 2008, which is the following Tuesday. New Mexico 117 is the highway that cuts through the National Monument south of Grants, New Mexico. State Police Patrolman Craig Vandiver said Monday that ranchers hauling cattle had seen the truck last Wednesday, and police had been called about it on Friday. Vandiver said that it appeared the truck was traveling south, and then it was stopped, and it had 2 flat tires. It appeared that Romero or someone had changed one tire, but couldn't change the second one because there was only one spare. Romero's daughter, Stephanie Hull, said the family had a mechanic look at the truck and determined that the tires were not damaged. They were deflated. And Vandiver, he said that the truck was not locked and it was stocked up with fruit, granola bars, sodas, and water and showed no signs of a break-in. A ball cap, a half-full soda, and a copy of the April 14th Albuquerque Journal were on the console. There were no footprints leading away from the truck, and tracking dogs from the local state penitentiary spent 6 hours searching the area last Saturday. They lost Romero's scent at the road, leading police to believe that he had gotten a ride from someone. Hull said that no one in the family knows why Romero would have been headed south on the road when his business would be in Albuquerque. It's a huge mystery to us, Hull said. Romero had a mild case of adult-onset muscular dystrophy that caused him to walk with an odd gait. But he was in good health, and he has no mental problems or memory problems, and police considered Romero's disappearance to be a missing persons case. There was nothing in or around the truck to indicate there'd been any struggle or anything criminal happening. Vandiver said, though, that police have no idea whether Romero might have come to harm after he left his truck. He was driving a 2003 blue extended cab Ford Ranger with a camper shell, and police are asking anyone who saw Romero or his truck to call the state police office in Grants, New Mexico. This case is really interesting to me. What did you think of this one?
I thought that he more than likely wandered off.
That's where the lava fields are there.
The what now?
So the national monument that is there it's the lava fields. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
Okay, this is evidence of past volcanic action in New Mexico. It's a field of leftover rock. I think it's El Mapai out there, but it has it's land that goes for miles that has like sandstone bluffs and what they call ice caves. And then it has lava flows. So lava flows and lava tubes are where the rock, the molten rock that came out of a volcano during an eruption, basically has re-solidified into a part of landscape. It looks like something out of Mad Max. The Mad Max movies. Mm-hmm. It's like this barren desert terrain with a lot of, black and brown. It's very easy to get disoriented. And if you actually go and read about the lava fields, there are multiple cases of people who have gone out there for hiking and other purposes related to camping or just having like a day trek who have come up missing, and some of them have never been seen again, and some of them have been found deceased. So, in all likelihood, that's probably what was happening here. The only thing that threw me off was the fact that 2 tires on his truck were deflated. That was interesting.
How long was it until his truck was found?
So the last financial transaction they have on record for him is on April the 14th. He got breakfast. Mm-hmm. The way that his truck is found, it's not very long because it is the middle of nowhere, but it's not completely untraveled. Does that make sense?
Right.
So if you look at an April 2008 calendar, the article that I was reading you came from a Tuesday. Essentially, it's when the article is published, a week has passed. They have a Monday morning transaction and some activity indicating that part of his business was completed. When I say some activity, basically he has a card transaction indicating he got breakfast. But that's the Monday prior to this article being published. So the 21st is the immediate Monday. It's been a week. The truck is noticed on the 16th, which is Wednesday. And the police stop by and check it out on Friday, which is the 18th. So the investigation really begins the 19th and the 20th. That's when they start searching for any kind of resolve to see where Stephen Romero might be.
So what do you think? And I'm sorry, I know it was talked about in the article, but I can't remember. Were the air caps removed?
It doesn't indicate how they were deflated. It just indicates that they were not damaged. They only needed air. They didn't need changed.
Okay, because I have, I don't know. I know that occasionally, like, my vehicle will have a tire with a slow leak, and if it sits for, a few days, it'll, the indicator light comes on that I need to put some air in it. So I don't know, I guess I'm just looking for, how flat were they and how did they...
Flat enough he had to stop.
Well, but see, that's what I'm wondering there. What if it happened while it was sitting there?
Oh, you're saying if it had been sitting there since Wednesday and but with 2 tires?
Well, I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Because if that were the case, we would need to know why he stopped. So it's a 2003 Ford Ranger. I would have to go digging a little bit. That's right around the time they started putting tire pressure indicators. It could be that he got a flashing light telling him to stop. And when he walked around, he saw that, one of the tires was flat, but 2 of them being flat. If it had sat for a while, I'd believe it. But, that's a fairly new truck. And if this guy knew he was traveling out there, I don't know. So one of the things that I thought, I always think this in these types of cases is you can actually drive a vehicle that is having all kinds of issues quite a ways.
Oh, yes.
And if you're paying attention, you can, I don't know that it's the safest thing to do, but I don't know, as opposed to wandering around to nowhere, it probably is safer. And so if with 2 tires that were flat, and if the vehicle wasn't drivable, so that's one thing, you've got to pull over for that, but that also doesn't happen just from nowhere, right?
Right. If it were 1 tire, I would think slow leak. Because it's 2, I tend to think
that somebody unscrewed the caps of his tires while he was eating breakfast, and then they followed him.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
That's what creeped into my mind, and I was like, so then he would have to stop, right?
Yep.
Which sort of sounds, now it could be that he had 1 tire that felt flat, and then, as it sat, the other one went flat, and it might have been him stopping. I had also thought in this case that maybe he did go to the doctor and that something was really wrong, and he intentionally drove and stopped and went out because, he found out he had a terminal disease or something. And it was weird that he bought food and stuff, though. That was strange. So it could be a case where he wandered off, and I did think that. But it also, now that I'm sort of running through all that, it's weird. It's a weird case.
Well, let me ask you this. If he skipped his doctor's appointment, what do you think?
If he skipped his doctor's appointment?
Yeah, like if he never ends up making it to his doctor's appointment, what do you think?
Well, see, I would still want to know what was he going to the doctor for, just because, like, what was his mindset?
Yeah.
Would it be possible that some sort of lapse in lucidity would cause him to pull over on the side of the road or wherever he ended up? Could some issue, like a health issue, cause that, right? Whether it be mental or physical. And so, if it were the case that he possibly had dementia or Alzheimer's, like early onset, and if that, I could imagine somebody getting confused and pulling off the road, right?
Right.
Okay. Short of that, it doesn't really make sense. I don't feel like both tires went flat at the same time, just naturally. I feel like maybe one was flat and one went flat as the vehicle sat there. But if he didn't go to his doctor's appointment and he wasn't in the early stages of some sort of cognitive disorder that would lead somebody to do something like that, I would seriously consider foul play.
Yeah, that's sort of how I feel about his cases. I would need a little more information. This is basically where he disappeared in Grants. It's like 4 hours east of the Grand Canyon. So this is an area that Israel Keys had been. If you go through the last timelines, the Texas trip, it's a long distance, but it is not way out of the way. Like if you look at like Lordsburg, because we know that Keys was in Lordsburg. If you're going over to Texas, you won't pass Grants, but if you're going somewhere else, you could. So we know he's been to Lordsburg because we have him hitting the ATM there in 2012.
Right.
And that's, while it is on his travel path, it wasn't exactly a convenient thing for him to be doing. For him to he sort of went out of his way to be seen as little as possible, although that's ultimately what did him in. So we know he's been in New Mexico. We don't know anything about this part of his timeline as it relates to New Mexico. This is I'm talking about the FBI timeline. That's the other thing that makes this weird. While Keys says that, people go missing in the wilderness and it happens all the time, we haven't found tons of examples of that. But he also said he liked a tight timeline. And we haven't found tight timelines as much as a lot of misdirection going on. So the gist of this is in April 2008, Keys sort of is off the reservation after going to Oakland, California. He goes Seattle to Anchorage in February. And then in March, there is information that someone went from Anchorage to Oakland. But again, this is one of those that doesn't have Keys' name on it. So you and I have been suspicious over whether or not this might be Kimberly. And the next time that Keys really shows up is the weekend of the 4th of July that year. He takes a flight down to Salt Lake City, Utah.
Yeah, I actually took the Oakland off, I guess, of mine.
Well, you thought it was Kimberly's, because Kimberly then goes to work and travel in Wyoming at this time.
And he meets her down there.
Right. And so he definitely has a rental car that lines up with July. But as far as this April thing, we don't have any accurate information as to where Keys might be. So this guy stays on my list as a maybe. Also because there are pit latrines there. And you and I were discussing it. They are in sort of a remote area that's still close to civilization that doesn't get a lot of traffic. Because of the nature of New Mexico, these might be some of the best pit latrines to search. So there's that.
It's dry.
Yeah, because it's dry and because you might find a different level of remains here. if possible. But again, that is also 2008, so it's 13 years ago now. Steve Romero is on my list, just like, Carrie Baum sort of stays in my question mark list that I have going. We've talked a lot about the pit latrine stuff, and I want to point out like an older case that I ran across from 2001. And the main reason I want to point it out is because nobody talks about it. Like, this case just sort of vanishes into the ether after there's a conviction in it. Now, this is not a Keyes case. This is a case where, well, I don't want to give it away yet. This takes place in Gobles, Michigan. You can start to find references to this case in March of 2001 if you look through the different local papers up there. I can't pronounce all the names in this case accurately, so I'm going to spell some of them. I noticed that this case had completely fallen off of the true crime radar. But the headline for the case, starting way back March 25th, 2001, is Teen Charged in Killing of Girl Found in Outhouse. So a jobless southwestern Michigan man has been accused of strangling a 16-year-old former girlfriend and dumping her body into a pit toilet. Matthew Roy, R-O-O-Y, is being held without bond since his arraignment late last week in Van Buren County District Court on a charge of first-degree premeditated murder and the death of Jennifer Hines. He's due back in court Thursday for a preliminary hearing. Investigators said that Rui, 19, admitted killing the high school junior with a cord in his parents' empty Gobles home and dumping the body in an outhouse about 3 miles away at the Three-Legged Lake public access area in the Van Buren County community. What a tragedy this is, Sheriff Dale Gribler said. From all indications, she was very well liked. Sheriff's Detective Brian Stump said that Roy seemed to be pretty cool and calm, kind of meek at times as he recounted the crime. No motive has been disclosed. Hines' parents reported the teen a possible runaway early on Wednesday. Deputies then received an anonymous tip that led them to the public access bathroom. Her parents gave deputies a list of people with whom she met or might have met, and the investigation quickly focused on Matthew, whom Gribler said was an acquaintance of the victim. About 550 students attend Gobles High School, where news of the junior's death staggered employees and students. The whole building is in a state of shock, said Principal Donald Bradley. An American flag is at half-staff outside of the school. Laura Woods, a school secretary, called Hines well-liked, very bubbly, a free spirit who was always doing her own thing. Always on the edge and always moving. Hines and Roy dated for about 5 months in 1999 when she was a freshman and he was a senior. Roy was born in Kalamazoo but lived in several states, most recently in Maryland, as his father's military career relocated the family. He returned to the Gobles area 3 months ago. The unemployed teen lived with his mother until about a month ago when he moved into a friend's apartment in Allegan, while his father was stationed overseas. He faces life in prison without parole if convicted of first-degree murder. The victim's sobbing friends and other schoolmates left flowers, dolls, and stuffed animals in memorial at the Lakeside Access site where the body was recovered. And it goes on to talk about sort of the arrangements that are being made for this girl. That's in March. And then you can follow the case sort of along the way.
He's found guilty in December.
Yeah, he is found guilty in December. In November, he's officially indicted and arrested, and they put him under a $2.5 million bond. And then he ends up he ends up pleading innocent to the murder charge.
He actually raised an insanity defense, and this actually is a case. It's a good example of how an insanity defense can backfire, because an insanity defense means you're admitting to killing the person and that the reason you killed them was because you were insane. You were not in control of what you were doing. And so in the event that your defense fails, you're going to be found guilty.
He elected for what's known as a bench trial. He only provided one witness in his own defense. That was a psychologist. And he said that he didn't think that Matthew met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the hearing. And the judge said that he didn't believe it either, and he handed down the guilty verdict.
Wait a minute. His own witness said he wasn't insane?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so his lawyer his lawyer argued during the Skates case. His lawyer's a guy named Gary Vichel. He argued during the State's case that Matthew was legally insane. And he only put on one witness. He didn't have to put on any witnesses. He could have just rested, but he decided that he was going to put on one witness who was a psychologist. And that's the defense's only witness. And he gets up and under cross-examination, he states that he does not think that Rui meets the legal definition of insanity, at least not at the time of the girl's slaying.
Okay, well, I would have to go with that was probably ineffective assistance of counsel, because I can't imagine. So if he had pled not guilty...
He raises this in subsequent appeals. They're all shot down.
Well, yeah, because he pled... Because when you're taking an insanity defense, it takes the element of not having committed the crime off the table,
right.
Because it's like guilty with justification, basically. And so if they didn't have a good solid source that testified that and that actually believed him to have been insane at the time, I can't imagine an attorney using that defense, because you're literally feeding your client to the wolves, which maybe he knew he was doing, and that's what, he felt like was justice there. But I don't know. I don't know enough about it to really make a call. But to me, with one witness that undermines your defense, I feel like that's really not somebody doing a good job as an attorney representing a defendant in a murder trial.
Well, the appellate courts ruled that it was primarily what was going on was that the client had hamstrung a lot of the defense attorney's efforts along the way. So among the evidence that was found related to Matthew having killed Jennifer, in the friend's apartment where he'd been staying, investigators found Polaroid photos that he had taken of Jennifer's body after he had killed her. DNA tests showed that the blood on Matthew's clothing matched Jennifer's blood. And there was a journal that Matthew had been keeping for quite some time, which included multiple entries expressing homicidal thoughts. And he had decided a very long time ago, and they couldn't determine if it was as early as 14 or 15, but several years earlier, he had decided that he wanted to kill someone to see what it felt like. In one of the quotes from Matthew's journal, he said, "If you're not my friend, you will die." He told police that he was making plans by phone to meet up with Jennifer on March the 20th. They were going to meet up at midnight. He went to a shed at his parents' home, which is the home in Gobles. They got to remember, his dad's deployed overseas. His mom is sort of there. He got a phone cord out of their shed that he would later use to strangle her. Now, that's what they cite as premeditation. And he had begun to plan out exactly what he wanted to do. This was not a crime of passion or anything like that.
Okay, well, now I realize, with you recounting that, I realized something. Like, if the insanity defense was just a Hail Mary, he would have had to plead guilty otherwise, because that's really all there is. Yeah.
So he told the cops, like, during his interview with them, that he met up with her. He actually went to her house after midnight, and he visited with her in her home, and then he convinced her to come back to his parents' house. His parents were not there, and they were drinking beers, and they had some mixed drinks. And after Jennifer fell asleep on the couch, Matthew went and got that phone cord that he had taken into the house, and he strangled her with it. He dumped her body, and her body was found the next morning by someone who was jogging nearby. The defense's only witness was forensic psychologist Thomas Shazer. And he came in from Ann Arbor. He had examined Matthew back in May to determine if he was competent to stand trial. Shazer admitted that psychology is not an exact science and that faced with the same set of facts, different psychologists reach different conclusions as to a person's mental health. He was of the opinion that Matthew may be struggling with borderline personality disorder, but that he didn't feel that he met the legal definitions of insanity at the time of the murder. He testified that it was a matter of degree. And Vachel, that's Matthew's lawyer, his defense lawyer, he asked Shazer about some of the comments that Matthew had made to him during the psychological evaluation. One of them was, I felt like I didn't want to strangle the girl, but something was not letting me not want to do it. I feel like my thoughts are being controlled by outside forces, and all of this was like a dream. These were statements that Matthew was making to the psychologist. Vachel argued that anyone who confesses to police about committing a murder must have lost their mind. I don't disagree with him there. To some degree, I think that that's a completely valid argument. And the court agreed with me. The appellate court agreed with me. And the Supreme Court agreed with me in that statement.
Did they overturn it?
No.
Oh,
They all agreed that
a confession
even his crazy was premeditated.
I see. Okay.
But Shazer noted that one of the legal standards of insanity is the person does not have substantial capacity to understand the wrongfulness of his conduct or to conform to the law. He said that because Rory had dumped the body and concealed some of the evidence in the crime, that showed that Matthew was able to understand the consequences of his action. Otherwise, they would have just found the body in his parents' home or nearby.
And he would just be standing there like nothing had happened.
Right. And so the other part of the process here that's mentioned in the appellant matters, but it's also mentioned in the bench trial by Judge Buell, he said that the case law tended to show if the person has the ability to control the times and places in which he or she commits the crimes, that person does not generally meet the legal definition of insanity.
Right, and so this he gave a timeline where he was in control. So
right, he was able to plan out the murder, and by doing that, he basically shot himself in the foot. And like you said, there was really nothing to do here but to plead. This Hail Mary was not even a Hail Mary. It was a Hail Mary after the game is over, the stands are empty, and everybody's in the locker rooms, and for some reason, you're still standing on the field throwing the football.
Right, it seems really weird.
Yeah, what really should have been done here is they should have played off the age, and they should have angled for the best plea deal possible, because then you never get to trial. Because if a prosecution has to prepare for trial in the murder of a young woman like this, they're going to pretty much go all out to win their case. And clearly it sort of seems like the defense is phoning it in here, but I have a feeling it's a lot more to do with Matthew. I don't know if you've ever known anyone with borderline personality disorder, but this type, it doesn't make them insane, but you would definitely question a lot of the rationalizations and logic. They have very black and white thinking when it comes to...
Okay, so do you believe... keeping all of what you just said in mind, do you believe that he really was thinking at a young age that he wanted to experience what it was like to kill someone? Or do you think that he just used that to, he was begrudged because she'd broken up with him or whatever?
Well, so this case is strange for me because it's really, they've been broken up for a year and a half.
Right.
And what this case really reminds me of as I look at it is the serial case, Adnan Syed and the murder of Heyman Lee. It's one of those things where he didn't have any friends and he clearly was planning this out. I totally believe that he just wanted to kill someone. I do not believe it's controlled by outside forces.
Right. Well, I was just curious about that because if you have an experience with anyone, they make you mad enough that in your mind you could kill them, literally physically kill them, that's one thing, right? But being a kid, 14, 15 years old, and thinking to yourself that you want to experience what it's like to kill someone. That's a completely different thing.
Yeah, well, so in this instance, let me run this one down and you see if this sounds familiar. They dated. He moved on from school. She considers him to be a first boyfriend, so she has like feelings for him, but those feelings are sort of lukewarm at this point, and they're more friendly than not. He comes over, he's at her house, and then she goes back to his house, and he pushes because he wants to, I don't know, have sex or be more intimate than she wants to be. And
that doesn't come up in the recount of it.
They don't mention any of that stuff.
Well, is there anything? Do you have any idea? We don't know.
No, but I'm just saying, like, I could believe that being a situation where he snapped, but then why did he have the cord?
No, I don't think he snapped. I think that if, like, he either wanted to kill her because he was holding a really bad grudge, okay, or he just picked her because he wanted to experience it and she was like going to be his first victim. But it doesn't seem like he took a whole lot of what I'm trying to get to here is like, was this a psychopathic serial killer on his way? Right. And I can't tell. And the reason I think that she would have been too close probably. And this is just my opinion, okay? My opinion is that true serial killers who are doing it from a place of being a serial killer, there's not a whole lot of vindictive emotion involved in it. And I feel like that would just be a natural thing for an ex-girlfriend and boyfriend to experience.
Huh. That's interesting. I mean, I think this guy wanted to be something more than he was.
He didn't do a very good job trying to cover it up, though.
I mean, he put her in a pilot train.
Well, yeah, but then he had all that evidence, though.
Well,
it seems like that would be the prerogative of a serial killer is to not get caught.
I think the prerogative of a serial killer is to kill someone.
Well, yeah, but they don't want to get caught.
Yeah, but all right. So when they commit the first murder, they're not a serial killer yet.
No, right. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that I feel like every single person on Earth is capable of murdering someone. Okay. I feel like with the right set of circumstances, anybody could kill somebody. However, not everybody on Earth, in fact, very few people on Earth are capable of being serial killers. And this is the type of case where his defense, his insanity defense, saying that he wanted to kill someone since he was 14 or 15 years old, it makes me wonder, like, which one of them is he?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, I think that some killers that are going to be serial killers, they develop very, very, very early. I don't think he was one of those. I think, honestly, I would say if this doc is legitimately looking at him in pretrial and thinking he's competent to stand trial, but he probably is like dealing with some kind of borderline personality disorder issue, I think that he's seeing things that we can indicate to him that maybe this guy's like feet being on the ground in reality are not 100% an accurate thing. Like maybe he's not all there, but he is certainly operating within legal sanity and competency. So he's competent, like he can stand trial, but he's aware that what he's doing is wrong, which his actions show. So the problem comes like this. This guy just like if you were to look at Israel Keys and say, how fucking lucky can one person get with a Courier situation where the body disappeared, nobody can find anything, without him talking, they never would have known that crime occurred or had anything to do with him without him opening his mouth.
It's insanity, really.
This is the opposite of that. This guy, he has pulled a phone cord out of his parents' shed before he goes to meet a girl who he used to have a relationship with at her house, who he talks back to his house. And once he convinces her to come back to his house, he kills her, he takes photos of the body, he gets her blood on him, which is one set of things. And then he disposes of the body, which I don't think he just came up with the idea of a pit latrine. I think you have to think that out a little bit. And honestly, I've said it before, that's a decent place to put a body. I don't know exactly how they caught him. It reads like it reads like there's two stories. One being someone who was in the park early that morning, and one being an anonymous tip that was phoned in that is never talked about again. Those two things, I mean, I guess it could be two different people, but
I was wondering if it was him that called in.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I wonder if he told on himself.
Yeah, because that would also kind of add.
There's an element of abandonment that comes with borderline personality disorder. And if they're wrong about that, and it's not just some kind of borderline personality disorder, not some kind of cluster B thing alone, and it's some kind of bipolar, he may have felt immense guilt after doing it. It still doesn't mean he's insane. It just means like he has now killed a person, and that could have driven him to call the anonymous tip in which case he was definitely not going to be a serial killer.
Yeah, I was going to say, that case, yeah, he's not a serial killer unless he was, because he didn't take the steps needed. Like, let's say serial killers that do taunt law enforcement or the media or whatever, they take lots of steps to make sure they're not going to get caught.
Yeah. Well,
and he didn't do that.
Yeah, he didn't cover his tracks well, because he leaving the blood laying around, having a picture of the body, all of those things, that is piss poor planning, even for premeditation. It's just bad planning.
It really is.
And I was going to switch over and talk more about Texas, but I'm going to talk in real time about two things that you know a little bit about, but you don't know a lot about, because I think they fit more with this case.
This one file that I've been hunting, and no matter how I say it in the episode, I promise you I'll screw it up on the live audio. So I'm making myself a note. And here is my note that I'm making myself. Okay. I think if you go into the FBI vault, where you would find this is probably in part 3 of 8. That's not my file number, but part 3 of 8, and it'll be around page 480 or so. There's a tip that comes in. Here's the problem with the tip. It's now unclassified. This is out of Whatcom County. They asked Whatcom County for a list of missing persons. On September 25th, 2012, the writer telephonically contacted a lieutenant of the Nooksack Tribal Police Department, NTPD, to determine if any missing persons investigations conducted between 2001 and the present remain unsolved. The lieutenant stated that they don't have any unresolved missing persons cases. But on that same date, the writer telephonically contacted the Lummi Nation Tribal Police Department, and a detective sergeant there was asked if they could determine if they had any missing persons investigations conducted between 2001 and the present that remain unsolved. The sergeant responded that the only unresolved missing persons case at that time is a person from November of 2011. And he's not discussed in this phone call, but the writer was aware of this case. This is a person who was wanted by the police when he disappeared, and several witnesses had reported seeing him more recently. So unlike that guy probably wasn't dead. Not specifically addressed in the reference lead, the writer would like to bring 2 unsolved homicide investigations to the attention of agents investigating Israel Keys. Information pertinent to the first victim is contained in file number 198A-SE94754. And then the other case, the file number is blanked out. Now, the second case is Leah Roberts. Okay, she is, in the way they list her here, is the victim, Leah Toby Roberts, had a date of birth in 1976, was a 5'5" tall female who weighed approximately 130 pounds. Roberts was last seen in Bend, Washington on March 13, 2000, and her vehicle was found off the side of a road in the Mount Baker National Forest. She's presumed dead. Her body has not been found. So Leah Roberts has been covered. More than likely, Keys was not there. The other person that they mention, they say, is the victim, Shannon Pauline Lathrop. Date of birth is 9/25/1977. She was a 5'7" female with dark brown hair, weighed approximately 150 pounds. Lathrop was allegedly a prostitute and had a history of mental illness. She died on an unknown date in June or July of 2000. Her partially decomposed body was found on 7/24/2000 on the Lummi Indian Reservation in Bellingham, Washington. The manner of her death is currently unknown. So this tip gets into the FBI files. The problem is, it's wrong. She died in 2008, not 2000. It was June or July of 2008. The FBI already had her case file, but they've never released anything about her case. And every time I find her mentioned with relation to keys, the date of her death is wrong.
The first one, this is a case that's bothered me for a really long time. And the way that you and I come across this is the FBI files related to Israel Keys. Leah Roberts is in there. And you and I have looked at her case and looked at her case and looked at her case. And we had some theories about her case related to a found body that they sort of have reshuffled. Other people have the same theory on the internet. Leah went missing. She actually, at the time she went missing, she and I would have lived almost in the same place. She was in Durham, North Carolina. And where she went missing was in Washington. On the FBI tip page, there's some information there that it's blacked out, but I know what case it is because they have the file number in there. And they have the dates wrong in there. They're talking about a case that someone seems to think happened in 2000, I think is what they say. But that's not when it happened. And I don't have the tip sitting in front of me. But it's the same tip as Leah Roberts if you're following at home with your own open records requests or FOIA requests. There's an incorrect case mentioned on there where the case number is right, but the information they give the FBI caller or FBI tip taker, who are usually like recruits, and they can be, other staff, they give them the wrong information. And I want to mention that one here, and then I want to mention a case that has just bothered me because I actually met someone related to that case. But this one, there's only one article I can find about this, and it's like one of the most fascinating little stories. So I'm going to read to you from the Seattle Times. This was originally published on April the 18th of 2009 by a guy named Peter Jensen, who's actually like a really well-known syndicated columnist now. And I read this in real time, like many moons ago. This is Seattle Times. Woman found by burning boat on Lummi Reservation identified, but the mystery remains. When Bellingham resident Shannon Lathrop, that's Lathrop, stopped calling her community corrections officer in mid-July last year, something was clearly wrong. Lathrop, a mentally ill offender supervised by the State Department of Corrections, called her officer, Jerry Reed, obsessively, sometimes more than 30 times a night. But after Reed met with Lathrop, who was 32 at the time, on July 16th of 2008, those calls mysteriously stopped. Reed went by Lathrop's motel room at the Cascade Inn on Samish Way on July the 21st, but she wasn't there. And then on July 24th, a body was found on North Red River Road on the Lummi Reservation. It was next to a burning boat and was so badly burned that it took months to identify the body as Lathrop. We knew something had happened to her, said Reed, who supervised Lathrop for years. Otherwise, she would have continued to call. It's sad that she died a violent death. The FBI identified her later that fall when they compared her fingerprint with a national database and found a match. So all of this is taking place in 2008. The FBI has not publicly released her identity, but Whatcom County Medical Examiner Gary Goldfogle and Whatcom County Sheriff's Office confirmed that it was Lathrop on Tuesday, April the 14th of 2009. Goldfogle performed an autopsy on Lathrop shortly after she was found and determined that she had been dead for several days before the fire. He said he'd received the results of toxicology tests, but those did not help in determining the cause of her death. The FBI had taken over the investigation into the case of Lathrop's death and hasn't shared any information with his office. FBI spokeswoman Robbie Burrows declined to comment for this story and directed questions to the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, who is also involved in the investigation. Sheriff's Chief Criminal Deputy Jeff Parks declined to provide any information about the death. "That's not something we're going to release," Parks said. "It's under investigation. We're working with the FBI. It's not going to help our case any to be releasing specific details." Lathrop grew up in Bellingham, according to court records, but only her dad remains in the area. Her mother now lives in Texas, and she has family in Spokane. None of the relatives could be reached for interviews for this story. Lathrop spent much of her adult life in Spokane, Bellingham, mental hospitals, and jail. Lathrop had a history of drug use, including heroin and methamphetamine. She was also prostituting herself on Samish Way, said her friend, Stephen Hedrick. Still, she was doing well with her mental health treatment and was just about to complete her supervision time under the Department of Corrections when she disappeared. Her last day on supervision would have been July 23rd, the day before her body was found. Stephen Hedrick, who lives in the Aloha Motel at the time on Samish Way, said he knew Lathrop for about 4 months before she disappeared. For several months after Lathrop's disappearance, Hedrick said that sheriff's detectives would come by his room to interview him and to have him pick out her associates from photo lineups. Hedrick said that Lathrop was frequently delusional and paranoid around him and talked about someone stalking her and trying to kill her. "I thought it was just crazy talk," Hedrick said, "and then she ended up dead. I just can't believe it. Maybe she wasn't talking crazy." This case has bothered me for a number of reasons and a number of years.
Right. They're not doing anything on this case.
Oh, man. I'll tell you what.
That's my opinion because...
No, I agree.
So just to kind of... It seems like the kind of death she suffered, which we don't know how she died, but her body was burnt, right? I think she pissed somebody off. And it sounds like she might have a kind of an annoying personality just based on what like her probation officer was saying about her calling 30 times a night. Seems like she might have been a little persistent. And I could totally see it going south with somebody that she was interacting with. That doesn't mean that it wasn't, she's not a good candidate for keys. I'm just saying it seems like her type of personality and all would, from how she's been described, it's surprising she lasted as long as she did.
Here's my thinking. Israel Keys he was being pretty careful covering his steps. Like, just generally speaking. And I've looked at this case. I mentioned to you that we we can pick him up in July of 2008. And so we started with the Stephen Romero conversation, but in July of 2008, we know that he hit Salt Lake City, and we know that his partner, Kimberly, is in Wyoming. I had wondered, so this ties into, did he kill prostitutes? Is she his? Is she not? I don't know. But I do know that if he was traveling and keeping little notes like he did on the Texas trip related to prostitutes in the area, this girl doesn't seem to be really, maybe she was advertising somewhere. It's hard to go back to 2009 and find records of things like that because all of his websites at this point have been shut down. It would become a question of, how did they meet? Did he know this area was a place where, women would be available? There's a lot of questions about this, but if the murder took place at the Cascade Inn, it's a local matter. If it's on the Lummi Reservation, it's a Lummi police matter, so the FBI would be the liaisons for that. But my gut tells me that this one could very well be like an easy one to figure out if it was Israel Keys. But just the fact that she was found by a burning boat on the reservation.
Wait, was she on fire?
She was burned and the boat was still burning.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Yeah. And, I have hunted around on this case to try and get information. And there's actually another podcast that does like Washington State cases that I have reached out to him because he lives near here. And I said, hey, is this something you'd be interested in? I don't think I can go any further with this case because I don't know that area, and I don't have that kind of networking that it would take with Whatcom County. But this case has really bothered me.
Unfortunately, this is more than likely, and I don't know this, it's just my observation. It's my opinion from my observations. This is probably considered to be a prostitute case, a prostitute murder.
Yeah,
and
misdemeanor homicide.
And we know how those are treated by law enforcement. And so because of that, unfortunately, I feel like it's always going to be open and not available for record release via request. They're really not doing anything on it.
Yeah, that's how
because they don't care. I mean,
well, it just, this is one that's sort of the ideal area. It's the ideal time frame. It's really.
So she would have to be the found body, I guess.
Yeah, I think she would be the found body. I think that he wanted her to be, not found to show any decomp or something. She could potentially be the found body. But she's never reported.
Missing?
She's never a missing person. And that mention that I just gave you is the only mention of her and her murder anywhere.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
So, and it is such an obscure reference that if you're not looking for it and you don't know exactly who that is, you wouldn't find it. And it's a year after the fact.
So she might not be the found body then.
I'm saying he may not know she was found.
That's what I'm saying too.
Yeah.
Because it is so obscure. It doesn't even sound like they've officially said it anywhere.
Correct. And so I wanted to, I'm sort of changing the order for you here. And I apologize for doing that to you at the last minute, but these are pretty softball cases and we covered the bulk of the episode. There's one more case I want to bring up for this episode. What are we at? Yeah, we're just over an hour. Okay. This one, I want to tell you about it, and I want to tell you about the timeline on it because I'm totally curious what you think of this. There's a Twitter question that I was asked about another podcast, which I don't listen. I'm not currently listening to. I've listened to bits and pieces of. I listened to the early seasons. They wanted to know what I thought of the theory of boat ramps, and the idea was that Israel Keys might be using boat ramps as his mental place marker on maps for where he put things. And they mentioned that Blake Falls Reservoir and like some of the things there that were found were close to a boat ramp. They were also close to a pit latrine. That was one of the reasons the pit latrines came up. The difference in the two is boat ramps might be mentioned on a map. Pit latrines are symbols on a map. Pit latrines specifically that are like latrines or vaulted toilets show up on Army Corps of Engineering maps. So some of the map work that I did very early on in this case, there were no real mentions of boat ramps there. You could tell there was a lake, and they might have an inkling of a picnic spot or a marina, but they didn't necessarily mention like boat launches and boat maps. But it's funny that somebody said that because I have a case that has been on my list that I haven't shared with anyone, including Meg to this point, because I held off on this one. And that is the case of a Jane Doe that was found in summer of 2012. It is a very weird case. This is out of Ord Bend. Meg, if you go to the show notes page for 722, this is out of Ord Bend. And Ord Bend, what interested me about this case, this park, is this is a boat ramp case. It's a very specific type of boat ramp case. On July 31st of 2012, an article was printed in the Oroville Mercury Register. And so Keys is in custody at this point. This is the article. The skeletal remains found Friday in Ord Bend Park were so charred from being burned at least one time. Detectives have no clues as to how the woman died. Representatives with the Glenn County Sheriff said on Monday, "This is an obvious death at the hands of another, unless she succumbed someplace else to natural causes and she was just dumped here," said Glenn County Sheriff Larry Jones. The sheriff's office is investigating the case as a homicide. A Glenn County Public Works employee and an inmate worker found a human skull about 3:30 p.m. Friday in a county burn pile at Ord Bend Park, The area is about 25 yards from where people launch their boats into the Sacramento River. A forensic anthropology specialist determined that the bones were those of a white female between the ages of 35 and 45 years old. Investigators have not identified the woman, but they have classified her as a Jane Doe. The woman's description does not match anyone missing in the North State. Detectives will check missing persons databases and have already put out a notice to other law enforcement agencies. The sheriff said that the remains were hidden from sight below landscaping clippings, and they had been in the spot for several months. Authorities do not know if the woman died in the burn pile area or if her body was dumped there, and a number of her bones are missing. The sheriff's office spent hours Saturday digging up the site and sifting through the dirt by hand. Investigators brought the skull and other bones Monday to Chico State University's Human Identification Lab for examination. The specialists there might be able to tell if the woman was injured, how, and with what. The skull still has teeth, and the bones had DNA, offering evidence that could lead to the woman's identity. The park was temporarily closed but reopened Saturday afternoon, said the sheriff. He said it was too early to speculate whether the death would be related to any other cases. It's a true mystery on our hands at this point. That's all quoting Sheriff Larry Jones there. Now, that case begins, obviously, in July of 2012. And at that point in time, Israel Keys is in custody in Alaska. So I know he didn't see this. It's only briefly mentioned anywhere. But a couple of months pass with this case. And this is what comes out next about it. This is also from one of those little independent journals out there. This one is the Marin Independent Journal. And this is from October the 11th, 2012. A mother learned on Wednesday that the burned skeletal remains found this summer in Ord Bend Park were those of her daughter, who went missing in 2005. Heidi Joanne Ring was 37 years old when she went missing. The Department of Justice Crime Lab in Richmond informed the Glenn County Sheriff's Office on Wednesday that Ring's DNA matched that of the skeleton. Glenn County Detective Greg Felton and Sergeant Rob Merrifield of the Chico Police drove to Cottonwood Wednesday afternoon to tell Ring's mother, Gretchen. On July 27th, a public works crew discovered a skull and a burn pile filled with brush and trimmings at the Ord Bend Park along the Sacramento River. They also uncovered other bones and jewelry. The case was being investigated as a possible homicide, although the cause of Ring's death is unknown. It's a sad detail to inform a parent of the loss of their child, and when that child has been missing for years, knowing parents and relatives are holding out hope their loved one will be located alive, the task is much more difficult, said Sheriff Larry Jones. However, there can be some relief and solace knowing that the loved one has now been accounted for. Ring's family, with the help of a national missing person organization, held a rally September 25th in Bidwell Park to raise awareness of Heidi's disappearance. Before the rally, Ring's mother said it's in agony not knowing how or where her daughter is. Ring had been in and out of homelessness, but did not pick up her prescriptions or assistance checks in the months that followed her disappearance, which police called a red flag. Anyone with information regarding the case is asked to contact the Chico Police or the Glenn County Sheriff. And although the trail is very cold, law enforcement must do its best effort in attempting to find out what happened to Heidi Ring and hopefully bring anyone responsible for her death to justice. So this case goes cold. So Keys is in custody. This woman is identified. It doesn't make the national news. It doesn't make any news. All they found of her was her partial remains and some pieces of jewelry. They weren't 100% sure they were hers. But this is someone's asking me what I think of boat ramps. This is boat ramps. There's one last article I want to share because I ended up in a room with Heidi's mom. It's been some time, but I remember hearing her talking to other people and thinking, well, any chance I get to share that story, I would share it. Whether it's related to what we're talking about or not, who knows? I like Keys for Southern California, but this is different. But this is the last article about it. This is from the Enterprise record, and this is actually from March 12, 2016. What happened to Heidi? A mother tries to heat up a cold case. What happened to Heidi Ring? It's a question that follows her mother Gretchen Ring for nearly 9 years. The prospect of knowing the answer to that question elicits tears. It would mean that I can die in peace, Gretchen, 72, of Chico, California, said. I want to know what happened to her before I die. I don't even know why. Maybe because I'm her mom, but I need to know. Heidi Ring went missing from Chico in the summer of 2005, when she was 37 at the time, in and out of homelessness. Her skeletal remains were found 7 summers later, in July of 2012, in a burn pile at Ord Bend Park near the Sacramento River in Glenn County. The sheriff at the time suspected that Heidi's death was a result of a homicide. Exactly how she died, however, remains unknown. Gretchen recently sat down with the Enterprise record to discuss Heidi's case, which she said is so cold it's buried under a 2,000-ton glacier. She's scheduled to speak at an upcoming missing persons conference starting Thursday in North Carolina, where advocacy groups, law enforcement, and affected families gather. Gretchen said she hopes her story can help someone else and perhaps unearth the answer she's been looking for. Hard to be Heidi. Gretchen Ring painted a portrait of her daughter that revealed the contrast of Heidi's life. Heidi had a warm heart and helped people regularly, but she was also bratty and hard to be around. She suffered from physical and mental problems and was rarely happy. She was often ill and in pain, suffering from migraines, seizures, or depression. She spoke her mind loudly. She was adorable and imagined herself playfully as royalty. When Heidi was 3, she asked her mom, "How do you get to be the queen?" She was hard to raise. Her siblings, an older sister and a younger brother, would try to avoid her. Heidi's last address was her brother's residence. She was a self-taught gemologist and particularly enjoyed blues music. Heidi smoked marijuana, and before she went missing, she was known to have been using some harder drugs. She put on a tough persona, but she was like a scared little girl inside, her mother said, adding that it was just hard to be Heidi, and it was hard to be her family, too. In June 2005, Gretchen Ring noticed that she hadn't spoken to her daughter in some time, and her siblings, Mike and Barbara, also hadn't heard from her. We thought, well, that's weird, she said, because even with all her problems, she's always kept very close contact with the family. Gretchen said that family members, pictures in hand, searched Heidi's haunts, area shelters, and other places. A lot of people would recognize her and say, "Oh yeah, I saw her last week," or at the wherever. And "Oh yeah, I saw her a couple of days ago. She was at Duffy's." It was a few days later when family members received a possible sign from Heidi. We heard through the Hobo Network, I think you call it, that Heidi was okay, Gretchen said. She was just mad at the family, and she was not going to contact us anytime soon. She was with a friend about an hour and a half from Chico. She was mad that we were looking for her. This irritated the Ring family. Heidi may have known that she was being sought and intentionally kept them at bay. Gretchen said that we kind of looked at each other and we were kind of disgusted, we're working our butts off trying to find her, and, she's who she is. The next plan of action was to stake out Heidi's brother's mailbox west of Chico, where Heidi's disability checks were mailed, but she didn't show to collect her money. Gretchen said a missing persons report was filed with the Chico police on June 19th of 2005. The Ring family also turned to private investigator Louis Parker for help. Parker, 84 of Chico, told the newspaper that posters of Heidi went out across the state and his search took him all over Northern California. But many of the tips and leads he'd gathered turned into puff and smoke. He would show people pictures of Heidi who had long brown hair, hazel eyes, and a wide smile on his hunt. And he said, everybody saw her, but nobody really did. During his search, one tip seemed especially promising. He got word that Heidi may have been picked up by a Caltrans worker east of Reading and taken to a bus stop with the intent to head to Portland. Parker said he and an associate got in a car and they rode on to Oregon, nearly reaching Eugene. After talking to local authorities, the lead, once again, chilled, and there was no sign of her. According to an Enterprise Record article published in 2012, after Heidi's remains were recovered but not yet identified, Chico police said they hadn't uncovered anything concrete in the 7-year missing person case, which was unusual for a woman that was said to be living on the street. Heidi's remains were found adjacent to a boat ramp at Ord Bend Park in July of 2012. They were identified as hers in October of that year. While the Glenn County Sheriff's Office initially expected homicide, Jim Mickelson, 67, an investigator who works with Parker, said that's currently just a best-guess scenario of what might have happened. There are other scenarios that wouldn't involve foul play that could also be possible. They called it a homicide with no supportive evidence, Mickelson said. He added, however, if ever there was a person ripe for a crime of opportunity, it would have been Heidi at this particular point in time. Heidi's situation was not unique, Gretchen said. There's a huge group of people in Heidi's position. They end up on the streets, and they become such easy victims. Gretchen conceded there's no easy solution to homelessness. What may work for one person may not work for another, but that means we just have to find a different kind of help for that person. She recently moved back to Chico after 23 years and noticed good things happening. She noted that the Stairways programming, which collaborated with the Chico police to help get people off of the streets and into service programs. Other challenges remain, citing area shelters that struggle financially or closed early. For her part, she plans to help out more at the Jesus Center on Park Avenue. I don't know how people don't get that they are us and we're them. It's your brother, it's your father, it's your sister, it's you. How would you want to be treated? Gretchen asked. Gretchen Ring was asked to speak at the National Missing Persons Conference in Wilmington, North Carolina, this week. The 3-day conference, sponsored by the Community United Effort Center for Missing Persons, features advocacy groups for missing people, homicide victims, and their families. The event is open to all who support the mission of finding a resolution for families who have suffered a missing loved one and are or have been a victim of crime. There, Gretchen says she'll tell Heidi's story. Maybe, Gretchen says, maybe I can help someone out somehow with their journey and this unforgiving landscape of pain that families are in. And maybe, by sharing Heidi's story, the Rings will find their answer too. Okay, so that's the story of Heidi Ring. And I view Heidi Ring and Shannon Lathrop as being in sort of the same boat.
It's really interesting that the investigator said that the sheriff's office had called it a homicide without any supporting evidence. The body was on a burn pile.
Yeah.
So I think that supports a homicide more than it supports other things that could have happened.
I think that area, he was thinking maybe it was an overdose.
Okay, but an overdose, all right. Somebody still would have had to put her body on the burn pile.
Right, but at that point, it's not a homicide. It's, what do they call it? Like when you're mistreating human remains.
And from the gist of her mother speaking through the article that you just read, or the articles you just read, I don't think anybody would have been close enough to her to even put her on a burn pile if she overdosed.
Yeah, I tend to. Have you seen a picture of her, by the way?
When did you send it?
Hold on.
Just now?
I can send one now. There was one in the. I didn't know if you had read those articles or not, because I'm like mixing some stuff up on purpose. Here's a picture of her. She's on the right. Yeah, these are like the flyers they were carrying around way back when they were trying to. There's
a wide variety of things that could have occurred here, and like the investigator that said that there was no evidence to support a homicide. I don't think that people who are homeless and overdose think to themselves, let's go take the body to the burn pile if somebody close by them overdoses. I don't know. I could be completely wrong.
A lot of time people end up in dumpsters or just out in the woods. I mean,
it's a weird thing. Now, what I didn't hear, and you may not know, it may not be anywhere, but was there an approximate time, like how long did they think she was out?
She was dead there's a story that it's sort of mentioned in those articles I was reading. I read a story that 2 transit employees tried to pick her up 2005 and give her a ride and wanted to give her some cash, and she was traveling somewhere, and they didn't get very far. But my feeling was that either that story is bullshit, and it didn't happen the way they said it, or it was the wrong person or something, or that's around the time she died. I'm not saying they did it or anything like that. I'm just saying.
Well, somebody gave the family some information about her being mad at them, and And I would say that's the very first pile of manure right there.
I think she was dead as soon as she
because-
didn't pick up that disability check.
Yeah, because how would she have made it? And, like her mom said, I feel like the family's instinct on that was probably spot on, because family is family. And if people stay in touch, they stay in touch, even if they're mad or whatever. And I think, so how long was her body at the burn pile?
So I think her body had been there for 7 years.
Okay, so you think it just took that long for it to... There's no telling how many times it got burnt.
So
That's why it said at least once.
Yeah.
I see.
My best guess on her, I think that she died in probably late May of 2005, if not early June.
Yeah, that would make sense. The very first time she went out of the ordinary. Now I would look. Okay, so somebody was detouring the family from searching.
Well, that could be their interpretation of it, but it's definitely something going on there.
That's really weird to say. To go out of your way to say something like
disagree.
that. So I would be interested to know who came up with that idea. Other than that, it's an interesting thing to ponder. I just want to point out what kind of led you here was a question about
boat ramps,
keys and boat ramps, and I just want everybody to sort of keep in mind what we know is that at Blake Falls Reservoir. He mentions the boat ramp, and he says that he tossed the gun 50 feet out from, or something like that. I can't remember his exact wordings. And so I think that keys is always going to have everything separated.
Correct.
So I think that boat ramps might be a place where he disposed of weapons, but I don't see somebody confidently stating you're never going to find anything.
Well, so this is right before he had problems with his boat. I don't think this case itself is going to necessarily be related to him, but it's an example of eventually things around boat ramps are found, even if it takes 7 years.
Yeah, this is a terrible
So the case I had him for in this time period is actually comes up a couple months after this in Washington. But generally speaking, that gets written off as a suicide. I don't think he's a suicide.
I don't know that that's how it's officially written.
Well, there's a couple of pieces of paper.
Actually, that's not true. I think it did say that. I think I did find something.
Yeah,
that said it was.
He's written off as he's not a suicide, in my opinion. I think that's interpretation because people don't want to think serial killer. Have we ever? We've mentioned him on the show or no?
No.
Okay, so
I've never said his name because of the implications.
One of the lake victims.
Well, I'm not going to get into him today. That's too much. We're trying to get Texas and then Georgia. Then we'll come back to the lake victim. But you're going to need some time to put all that together, I assume. So, thank you for joining us for our Cruel Summer episodes, where we go back to looking at Israel Keys. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.